name is Angela. Perfect. So it's being recorded. So if you don't want your faces on the recording, you can turn off your camera. That's very much okay. So again, I'll restart with my introduction. My name is Angela, and I'm chairing this panel. I'm also presenting later. I am based at the Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research at the University of Manchester. I'm a social scientist, and a lot of my work are in low carbon energy and agriculture. I also do some of my current research are on climate action on a grassroots level and city level decision making. Shall I pass on the intro to Ambi, because you're the next on my screen?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Ambi. I'm a postdoc in geography at King's College London. My research mainly focuses on agrarian change in India post-liberalization in the 1990s, specifically GM crops and groundwater irrigation. Thank you.
Do you want to nominate who's next, Ambi?
Right. Gopi, maybe.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Gopi Shankar. I'm a doctoral student at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore in India. My research mainly focuses on farmers' livelihoods, basically their market access and how the livelihood security is affected in their market access channel. Thank you.
Who do you want to go next, Gopi? Do you want to nominate the next speaker, Gopi?
Vayu. I hope I pronounced the name correct.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. My name is Wahyu. I am working for Mercy Corps Myanmar and also Uganda at the moment as a market system development specialist. Yeah, so as the name suggests, my role is really providing technical assistance to the team in Myanmar and Uganda around a market system development approach. Thanks. So, Dr. Rakia, you want to?
Okay. My name is Rakia Maman. I'm a social scientist, an educator from Nigeria. I teach politics and international development at the National Open University, and but I'm currently a Ted Fund Morgan State postdoc in Baltimore, Morgan State University, where I am conducting research on homelessness. Yeah, and also a faculty within the space. Thank you. I nominate Saada too. I think it comes only natural. We work together. All right, Saada too, you go. You're on mute. You're muted.
Good morning.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Saadat Tubaba, and I'm a lecturer at Kaduna State University in Nigeria. I teach human geography and also environmental studies. I'm also the head of environment at the Center for Energy and Environment in the same university. And I don't know if there's anyone left to nominate.
Yeah, that's okay. That's all the panelists, but because we are a small group, I think it's just fair if we ask if you're happy to Jeffrey and Kranzi to introduce themselves as well.
Very good, thank you. My name's Jeff Rockcliffe King. I've been a member of the DSA since the 1970s. Oh, wow. But I'm a strange one in this company because I'm not an academic. I walked away from my PhD in about 1972. I've been working as a practitioner, I guess you'd call it, for a very long time. I've been in close to 100 countries altogether. But my area started off as development, but when it was being invented, I guess, as a study. but I went deliberately to rural development, which over the years has pretty well morphed into poverty reduction. So that's what I do. I'm still active, and I'm very happy to hear what the clever people can tell me about this business, with which I've been struggling for a long time.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Kranti, do you want to do a
Hi.
brief introduction?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Kranti. I'm a doctoral student from Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. I just found the topic very fascinating and all the papers that are there, and which is why I'm here. I am also presenting in another panel, and my thesis is basically on informality and accumulation in India, where I look at the role of agrarian change in how it shapes the non-agrarian informal sector and accumulation processes. So very excited to be in the session. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'll start sharing my screen, and then perhaps we can start the discussion. I hope that, Arnab is here, and I feel like because we've done the introduction, Arnab, welcome to the panel. Do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself? Oh, he's not here anymore. That's okay. I can share my screen now, and I think that we'll kick off the discussions. Thank you, everyone. It's great to hear that we have common interests, and we're all in this panel. For hopefully we're all looking forward to a really good discussion. Arnab, you were cut off earlier because we are a small group. We're asking everyone to introduce themselves. Do you want to introduce yourself as well? It's okay if it's okay if not as well. Feel free to unmute if you're happy. Great.
Sure. My name is Arnab. I'm joining from India, and I'm working as a research associate.
Perfect. I'll share my screen now, and we can start. Welcome everyone again to our panel on agriculture and livelihoods. Briefly, we've done some introductions, so that's wonderful. We will start with presentations. The presentation will look at the Myanmar first case study, an institutional design for inclusive market access. Next, that's Gopi who's coming after the Myanmar presentation. The third presenter would be Ambi, and the fourth would be Saadatu and Dr. Rakia. And then we'll have 10 minutes Q&A or discussion with the audience, and then we'll do a brief summary and closing. These are the presenters that for the panel, and we've done the introduction. That's wonderful. I guess it's time for us to kick off. So this first presentation is a project that the University of Manchester and Mercy Corps Myanmar, plus our other partners in Myanmar, the Renewable Energy Association and Biomass Energy Association in Myanmar delivered. And I will kick it off, Wayu, if that's okay. I will time for 5 minutes, and I will be fair and not speak more than 5 minutes. I'll kick off with a brief overview of the things that we learned from the project, and then I can also give the floor to Wayu next, so that he can answer some of the questions or the things that we wanted to discuss in terms of the learnings, the lessons that we did in this project. Right, I'll start the timer now. So this project on bridging agricultural livelihoods and energy access in Myanmar, we set out there to find out how increasing energy access could help rural livelihoods in the area. But we learned many things in between that. Firstly, we can't just introduce energy access from bioenergy that immediately without addressing other needs, such as access to credit and fair financing schemes. One of the big learnings or lessons for us was that we can't introduce or ask them to upgrade their facilities or for rice husks for bioenergy generation without offering ways for them to access credit. So in relation to that, we also learned that investment and supports are very much needed. And it's a big question where that investment and support is coming from right now, and why you will talk to us later about their work briefly in Mersicor, Myanmar, and in Labuta, the area in Myanmar where we work right now, or at least during the course of our research. NGOs are instrumental in doing the development work in the area, but we all know that they don't stay there for the longer term. So that's one of the things that the questions that we have, or the questions that we are left with in the project: what will happen and where will the support and investment come from? Community partnership exists, and that could be a way for capacity building. Collaboration is very much important. That was visible in the value chain and the value chain mapping that we did. And there's definitely a need for policy responses. I'll turn over to Wayu, who will help us answer the question on the Linking Labuta to Markets project. If you've seen the presentation, it asks about Wayu talked about LLM. It has achieved some success, and we're curious to know how this looks like for smallholder farmers, especially in the long term. Wayu?
Thanks, Dr. Angela. So I think as a development worker, we always try to look for transformative changes in our effort to support actors, whether in the value chains or market system, or in a different systems where we operate or intervene. And in this sense, smallholders, we certainly also looking at stakeholders beyond smallholders, and this can be any actors, whether public and private actors along the value chain or market systems where we work in. And certainly we also would like to see changes as much as possible to be transformative within those actors. And yeah, in this sense, we love to see these smallholders that we are supporting, not just adopting and or adapting the behaviors that or practices that we try to promote, but also to see them having capacities to expand and or extend what they've learned beyond their immediate environment, as well as their abilities to respond to new challenges and opportunities as much as possible based on the systemic incentives they see in the value chains or the market system where they operate. Again, this also applies to other actors in the value chains or market systems beyond the smallholders, either public or privates. And yeah, and our experience suggests that beyond the improved capacity and ability to look after opportunities and also incentives based on those opportunities, we also see the importance of conducive enabling environments that will continue to nurture the positive changes beyond the time frame of the project and play facilitative roles in ensuring that market actors, especially smallholders, be able to to continue to respond to any new challenges or opportunities beyond market access to inputs, access to finance, access to energy, and other things. So yes, thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Wayu. That's great. If you have any follow-up questions, we'll allot time for that after the 5 minutes of the presenters. Let's move on to Gopi, who did research on institutional design for inclusive market access and smallholders' livelihood security. Gopi presented a conceptual framework that they developed for an ideal institutional design for inclusive market participation. It is very interesting in the way that it reflects the limited income opportunities of farmer households and the challenges that need to be addressed for gainful market participation. One of the questions that we want you to expand on is about Totgar's Cooperative Sales Society. Can you tell us more about it? When was it established? And can you share some successes and challenges of their current market design? Gopi, when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you. Sure. So what I'll do in this 5 minutes is I'll quickly talk about the brief idea of the paper and then move on to this question that you have posed.
Yes, please.
If it's okay. In recent decades, there has been a resurgent interest in agriculture-led development, and a significant element in that process has been to connect farmers with markets. Market participation is an important element in that. And following that line, there has been several institutional innovations that have been initiated and implemented. Especially in India, there has been several market linkage mechanisms, market linkage institutions that have been policy-led market linkage institutions have come up. But yet, the living conditions of smallholders continue to remain poor, largely. So our review of some of the prominent market linkage institutions suggest that, one, they are primarily focused on enhancing income. So there is an income centeredness or price realization centeredness on that. Second, these market linkage institutions exclusively focus on agriculture markets. But farmers and farmer households, if you look at it, they are located at the intersection of multiple markets. So in the larger scheme of things, agriculture markets is just one component in there, if from a livelihood perspective. And third is the inclusiveness. Across these institutional innovations, institutional mechanisms, there has been a large farmer bias. There is a general tendency to exclude smallholders. So our inquiry in this paper is to, if this is the situation, what ought to be an ideal institutional design that can help smallholder farmers improve their security, their livelihood security being in the market through the market access channel. So to answer that, we first developed a theoretical framework. And then we use that framework as a lens to examine a specific case. So the central idea that we are talking about in this framework is that, as I said earlier, farmer households are located at the intersection of multiple markets. Agriculture markets is one. Then there is labor market, there is credit market, there is consumption market, there is health, education, etc. But among all these markets, their income is coming from only agriculture output market, assuming that their main source of income is agriculture. So their income is actually impacted by their gainful participation in agriculture markets. But this participation is actually influenced by their outcomes in many other markets where they are located in. So this agency or this capability to participate in output market becomes very important, so that they gain from the output market. And this is influenced by the risks that they face, both household level as well as business level risks. By business level, I mean related to agriculture. It could be market risks, it could be other risks related to agriculture, and there could be household level risks also, like, say, for example, like credit shock or a health shock can also impact their capability to participate in agriculture markets. And their ability to participate in agriculture market is also impacted by the access constraints in terms of infrastructure, the scale economies, etc. So the whole idea, if I have to summarize, is for farmers to gainfully participate in output market, they should have the agency to decide when to sell, where to sell, and how much to sell. And this is impacted by the risk mitigation and the access constraints. So farmers need a set of services, not just access to agriculture markets. Farmers need a whole set of services so that their capability, or the agency, as we call in the paper, to gainfully participate in the output market. So to illustrate this, we use this framework as a lens to examine a specific case. We study the case of Totgar's Cooperative Sales Society. So now I come to the question that you have posed here. So it's a old cooperative. It's almost 100-year-old cooperative. It was established in 1923. It was established as an agriculture marketing cooperative. The main crop that they deal with is arecanut, which is a high-valued commercial crop. But along with that, they also started issuing credit, but it's not as a credit society. It was more like a moneylender setup, wherein they were extending credit to the farmers. So for a very long time, they continued as a marketing society, just like any other marketing cooperative, largely pooling the produce and selling it, or facilitating the trade in the regulated market by being a commission agent. In the last 20 years, they have diversified their activities quite a lot, mostly in response to member needs. So one example is in the output market in early 2000s, there was a steep fall in price. So till early 2000, they were merely pooling the produce, aggregating the produce, or facilitating the trade in regulated market as a commission agent. But in early 2000, when the prices fell, they became a trader. They decided to become a trader, so that in the regulated market, the price discovery happens through a competitive process. So they compete along with other traders in the regulated market for purchasing the produce from farmers. So it's not merely, so this is one distinguishing factor. This is one factor that distinguishes TSS from other marketing cooperatives.
Thank you. Do you want a few more seconds, or because it's more than 5 minutes? You can take a few more seconds now, or you can elaborate on that later. What's best?
Oh, okay. Okay.
Is that all right?
So this cooperative is so basically, yeah. Basically, I'll just wind up. Basically, most of these activities are in response to farm member needs, and these services are provided on the strength of the crop, or strength of the value of the crop that the farmers produce. And a set of services are provided. It's there on the slide that I have shared. There is input market, output market, credits, consumer goods market, healthcare, and a few support services also. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. Again, follow-up questions and more later. We'll just have to make sure that everyone gets a chance to talk about their research. Ambi is next to talk about distress-induced de-agrarianization from semi-arid smallholder commercialization in India. Would you like to share your screen?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Oh, it says, oh, I have to wait for you to stop sharing.
I'll stop share.
Sorry.
While he's sharing this screen, if you've had a chance to look at his presentation, Ambi talked about the realities of smallholder farmers in the research. These are quite telling, and they provide evidence and issues that are likely deeply rooted in many years of policy and market failures, not just in India, but in many other countries. So the question that we are posing for Ambi, which you're free to discuss later, is on, can you tell or reflect on what potential policy solutions will be needed to address the issues that you raised in your work? Floor is yours, Ambi.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Ambi. So this presentation is titled Distress-Induced De-Agrarianization from Semi-Arid Smallholder Commercialization in India. This is a paper that builds on my PhD fieldwork. So in this presentation, I examine the intersection of three phenomena in rural India since economic liberalization policies in the 1990s. One is the accelerated process of agricultural intensification by smallholder farmers, particularly in semi-arid areas of India, who transitioned from subsistence farming. Second is that agricultural intensification via market price risks and climate change has pushed farmers to rely on non-farm livelihoods to subsidize their household expenses and farm losses. And third is the problem of jobless growth, where economic growth has not been accompanied with skilled non-farm job creation, meaning neither farm nor non-farm incomes have been enough to make ends meet. I draw on 8 months of ethnographic research in Telangana, South India, consisting of 94 interviews and 151 household surveys in 2018-2019. I argued that the dryland intensification of capital-intensive crops such as BT cotton and groundwater irrigation technologies deepened long-term indebtedness via persistent harvest failures. This increased the reliance on non-farm incomes, which was a distress coping outcome for farm losses, debts, and rising household expenditures. Yet, I also found that non-farm livelihoods themselves were informal and low paid, a symptom of India's post-liberalization non-farm labor market, pushing farmers to use further loans and increase indebtedness to meet day-to-day cash flow economic pressures. So that's just a brief summary of what I did. So I guess in the presentation, I grounded the empirical rural livelihood realities, not just in India, but in the global South, propagated by economic liberalization policies. So I'll now move on to the question, which was, what potential policy solutions will be needed to address the issues raised? So first of all, this is obviously a difficult question to answer, as it encompasses both the farm and the non-farm sector, as well as structural problems in the political economy of India. Nonetheless, I'll organize the policies around 3 planks. So one is there can be incentives such as linking cash transfers to help farmers shift to agroecologically and indigenously suited crops, as well as diversifying cropping patterns between food and non-food, livestock, and agroforestry. This will help spread economic risk and improve adaptation against climate change, and cash transfers would aid cash flow problems for rural households, although temporarily. Second, to mitigate against price risk and bargaining problems of participating in agricultural value chains, I would argue that you need structures such as cooperatives or farmer producer organizations to help pool risk, resources, and bargaining power with buyers and wholesale traders from smallholder farmers, whether they come from corporations or government. And finally, for farmers, I would advise skill upgrading outside the farming season to decrease their reliance on the current low-paid, labor-intensive work such as construction and agricultural labor, and extending this to rural youth who are often educated. One policy could be apprenticeships and skill training incorporated in their education. So whether it's college or university level, this can be in things such as practical and financial literacy, IT skills, and other practical skills such as electrical, plumbing, painting, carpentry, and even value chain upgrading in agriculture to help out their parents. So yeah, I think that's my 5 minutes.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Ambi. Let's move on to the 4th presentation. And I think this should be the final presentation. Before we go on to wider discussion with people in the room, Rakia and Saadatu will talk about their research on intersecting adaptation among urban horticultural farmers. In their slides, they talked about how climate impacts are evidently felt by urban farmers in Kaduna, leading to more challenges in terms of their finances, access to resources, and overall day-to-day living. From the statements, their participants seem to talk a lot about the costs associated with adaptation or changing their practices. So the question that we wish for you to address later is for you to tell us what their immediate solutions are to their socioeconomic challenges. And passing the floor to Rakia and Saadatu when you're ready.
Well, thank you very much, Angela. And thank you, colleagues, for a very interesting summary of your presentations. So we looked at how horticultural farmers in Kaduna, is a large city in northern part of Nigeria, are adapting to rising temperatures. And so basically the study focused on how these farmers adapting to climate change. This study is significant if you, for one main reason is that the food security, typically the subs in Nigeria and sub-Saharan Africa, our daily diet consists mostly of starchy staples, but this is usually accompanied by vegetable stews and sauces, and they have become very important source of micronutrients. We all know popularly about the hidden hunger, which is a major cause of malnutrition in sub-Saharan Africa, is basically the deficiency of such micronutrients. And Nigeria also, like we heard from the plenary today, it's one of the world's fastest growing urban population, and the temperature are expected to rise by up to 2.5 degrees by the 2060s, with the heat days rising significantly. And it's also rapidly urbanizing. But however, farmers have begun to adapt to this effect, and collectively, both individually but also collectively, and their strategy intersect both at homes and at field, with far-reaching implications on their socioeconomic with far-reaching socioeconomic challenges and adjustments that they have to make. I'll pass it on to Saada to kind of elaborate on some of this immediate socioeconomic challenges that they face, and also some of the solutions that they have proffered. Thank you. Saada, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Rakia. Thank you, everyone, for an interesting presentation. Okay, in the study area, farmers are actually very poor, and the fields that they cultivate are not large. I mean, along the stretch of wetlands that we did the study, there were about 70 farmers working on 60 hectares. So some of the immediate solutions to their problems, the first, just like I think Ambi mentioned, it's something that these farmers already do. The first is diversification, both in the crops they grow and also in what they do, their occupation. Many of the farmers also have other things that they do. For example, some farmers take 2 days off and they sell their vegetables in weekly markets, sometimes going to different communities to sell the vegetables. So they trade in vegetables as well. Some other farmers also trade in, we call them provisions here in Nigeria, food stuff. They have mini stalls in markets where they sell milk, tea. So they don't, many of them don't rely solely on the horticulture for their incomes. And the diversification also in the crops they grow. None of the farmers grows just one vegetable. They always grow, it's a minimum of 4 vegetables so that they can hedge against the loss of any one vegetable. And also farmers rely on their social networks heavily as a solution to their socioeconomic challenges. They borrow short-term from family or from friends or from some of the relatively more better off farmers. But by far the most important, I should say, maybe coping mechanism they use to solve their problems is actually the sale of livestock. Because well, it's known that farming is usually integrated agriculture, it's livestock rearing. Rarely do you have farmers who do not keep livestock. But this is also the case for the vegetable farmers. They usually keep small ruminants or poultry, and it's usually the first port of call when they need money. You sell a goat or a sheep or some colt. And the interesting thing is that not only the farmers sell their livestock, if a farmer needs to solve a problem, people within the household can also sell their own livestock to support the farmer. So that's usually the first port of call. And one thing that we actually learned from the project is that institutional support, even though we know that institutional support is usually weak in Nigeria, but in this case, it was missing completely. And farmers need this support. If you think about the effects of climate change, they needed to manage risks, to link them to markets, support for climate or weather-related disasters. All that is missing from formal institutions. For example, if you take irrigation, that is often touted as one of the most important adaptation strategies for a country like Nigeria, in which agriculture is mainly rain-fed. We could actually look at the irrigation that vegetable farmers use as a test case of how irrigation can be scaled up in future. But the government support for it is completely missing. And we, as I said earlier, we know that these farmers are poor, so they're limited in what they can do. For example, one particular example that they spoke to us about was needing bigger engines when water resources, because they say dry season farming is synonymous with water. And when there's a reduction in water resources, it can lead to a reduction in income, and also a reduction in income has cascading effects even at home. So you would have thought that dry season farming is where the state would give a lot of institutional support, and this could be scaled up, but there's no such support at all, unfortunately. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Saudatu. Thank you. That's very interesting. It was very brief and fast, but I hope that gave everyone some idea and some things to think about in terms of agriculture and livelihoods. Now I think we open the floor for those who are who have questions about the presentations, or at least some reflections. It doesn't have to be a question. Some of the things that maybe we want to talk about in terms of agriculture and livelihoods, and what potential, I mean, we talk a lot about problems, any potential solutions that may be or should be in place. Is anyone, we have roughly 3 minutes, but if you're happy to extend for 1 or 2 minutes, that's all right as well. I'll stop sharing the screen and maybe invite those who, whether or not you're in the panel, those who are participants in this panel, the audience, those who are listening in. Any thoughts? Or anyone from the panelists too, if you want to expound more on what you were saying earlier, that's very much welcome as well. If there's none, I'll kick off. I guess I'll kick off with one of the observations from all the presentations today. I mentioned earlier that we talk a lot about challenges, and I think this is very much inherent in Global South research in agriculture and livelihoods. And one of the things upon reflection on your presentations and everyone's presentation is farmers, smallholders are sometimes left to their own devices, for lack of a better term, to address the solutions. And this is also why I pose questions on policy in some of the presentations, because there is some, I feel like it shouldn't be left to the farmers alone. There are problems such as in this livelihood that, you know, they are in a debt trap. They are, they're having to access or sell their goats, as Saudatu has mentioned earlier, to get by, and that's kind of like not sustainable in the longer term. There is some promise in the market design that Gopi has presented as well. But yeah, these support, we need something longer term. And I wonder if the panel agrees with that, or you have other opinion to share.
Well, I think in terms of institutional support, we can't overemphasize how that is so missing. And within this whole adaptation, particularly in the area of adaptation. And I don't know, Ambrish, what your thoughts are around. I saw that you talked a lot about institutional support. What is really in your experience? Why are we stalling in this area? I think it's a big link. Yeah.
Yeah, institutional support wise, I would argue that in post-liberalization in a lot of countries in the global south, they cut public funding for things like extension support services. And then they also tried to decentralize. But when you cut public funds and you decentralize it, it only leaves, speaking to extension officers, it only leaves them so much time and capacity. So, for example, they're given 1 or 2 extension officers for 30, 40 villages. So it's very hard for a farmer to get help when they need, which is why one of the potential policy solutions I suggested was to form cooperatives or farmer producer organizations, because at least you'll get better bargaining power and a better voice than speaking as one household. And it will work better with value chains as well within markets.
Thanks, Ambi. I think maybe why do you want to share about farmer producer enterprises? Because this is the approach that they took in Myanmar. Mercy Corps facilitated gathering together farmers so that they can form a group, and as you said, maybe make their voices more heard than being one household. Why do you want to share more about lessons from FPEs?
I would like to add to what Ambi just said about the farmer producer organizations. So much of the government initiated institutional support are eventually failures. Extension services is a typical example of that. And much of these activities can be taken up by the farmer producer organizations because one, they are local, so they know the local needs, and this collective risk sharing, etc., are available. But much less talked about in the context of farmer producer organizations is their management. They're also organizations. So the management capability becomes extremely important, especially let me take the case that I studied. So since the case which I studied has a multitude of activities, it's highly diversified, then management becomes very important. Management capability becomes very important, even to identify members' needs, to translate that into activities and to make them sustainable. I think that is a little less talked about area in the context of farmer producer organizations, and I think may require much more attention. Thank you.
And just to build on those note, I think in addition to managerial capacities, they also need actually in our experience good governance systems, including processes that allow bottom-up feedback loop processes in place, and certainly to support the effective operational of the entity. So the good governance system and internal mechanism will certainly need also to cover what you call it, a system that will incentivize expected behaviors among members and directors and management team, but also discourage bad behaviors, right? Because there's a potential, there are many lessons around members who what you call it, join the groups with high expectation of returns, but not willing to do their parts properly, and therefore what you call it, kind of disincentivize for those who want to do good for the through the organization. So yeah, so I think I just want to highlight that the importance of the governance systems that allow people to or encourage people to behave expected behaviors within the organization.
Dr. Rakia, you unmuted. Do you have something to add? And there's also a question in the chat. But yeah, Dr. Rakia, are you hoping to add to the discussion?
Yes, but the question on the chat, go on with it. I wanted to see if Saadatu was willing to share the fatalism that we saw in terms of the whole, how farmers see this whole extreme events. But Saadat, do you want to share that? I thought that was rather telling.
Oh, yes, it was something we actually observed, that farmers are not too worried about changing climate in itself. They're basically, farmers feel that their socio-economic situations can actually, and I guess that's what adaptation is all about. Farmers feel they can, rising temperatures, hotter days, flooding, increased flooding, all these can actually be, what's the word, maybe be hedged against, I think, if their socioeconomic conditions were much better. And I think that's just what adaptive capacity is. If adaptive capacity is strengthened, actually, then climate change impacts hopefully would not affect the farmers to such an extent as to make them leave agriculture. It's something that can be managed. They can adapt, but they need support, basically, because the fatalism she was talking about, farmers, it's a very religious society. So farmers believe climate change, the weather, there's nothing they can do about it. So why worry about it? But what they can do is their own conditions. If something can be done to improve their socioeconomic conditions, then they can weather the situation. Pardon the pun. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadatu and Rakia. And for those who have contributed, let's go to the questions on the chat. This is from Kranti, and it's for you, Ambi. Do you think there is a difference in the non-farm jobs in rural Telangana, say relatively high productive jobs in agriculturally prosperous regions?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So I looked at specifically smallholder farmers, so SC, ST, OBC caste farmers. This is defined as owning less than 2 hectares of land in semi-arid Telangana. So this makes up 88% of the farming population. So I looked at this like smallholder majority, where they were limited to construction and agricultural daily wage labor, paid $3 to $5 per day. However, yes, there's definitely differentiation within non-farm jobs. So in more prosperous agricultural regions, you can have in the dry season, farmers themselves who do other roles such as working in factories or as drivers, or in other artisanal work like carpentry. So I saw some of that in other villages I visited outside of my fieldwork. But the key difference in more prosperous regions is the intergenerational effects. So their children are often very well educated. So the investment is in their children to migrate to cities and work in the public sector, government jobs or private sector, and they would send remittances back to the household. So so there is differentiation by class and caste landholdings, but within my context, because I wanted to look at what would be the average experience of smallholder farmers who are numerically dominant, and this is the case. So even if their children are educated, they run into the jobless growth problem, where if they don't have contacts or social networks in cities, they themselves are underemployed or unemployed, so they're not able to help the household despite their education. So these are hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Ambi, and thanks for that question. I've posted in the chat that we are technically running over time. You're welcome to stay if you want. Well, we want to address all questions before we wrap up. And I hope that's okay with those of you. I feel like we're staying on because we are engaging in discussion, so that's good. I'll turn to the next question in the chat, which is from Ogeto. I'd like to hear experts' view on possibility of institutional support without considering policy options. Is this possible? What institutions, I guess one other thing is, what institutions are we looking at that can do this without policy support? And also, how long can that stay on in terms of like long-term planning or longer-term solutions rather, if there is no policy support. Any thoughts? Sorry, Dr. Rakia, I see when you unmute, and so I wonder if you have if you have something to say.
No, I just wanted to see if I can understand the question. Policy without policy support, because sometimes there are no policy, but you have organizations like the third sector, you know, having having their own intervention in this spaces. Is that the kind of thing you think the question is about?
Yeah, I guess at least one of the institutions that I have in mind are all these bigger organizations like the World Bank or those who are working in this field, international non-government organizations, and Mercy Corps is in that space. And this is one of the things that we raised earlier. I guess it is possible to have some institutional support from these actors, but whether or not that can stay for long term is a question, at least for us in our project. I mean, also holding these bodies accountable to that, like how I've seen projects on the ground where World Bank have started an initiative, donated in that case, an agricultural machine that's not been used by the community. I think there is a space for researching, from a research perspective, for understanding how effective are the interventions of these institutions that has money that can potentially address some access to financing issues, but not for longer term. And it's a big question, I think, in development research and practice. And I think it's also got to do with holding these bodies accountable to how they do monitoring and evaluation, how they deliver their projects on the ground. Yeah,
I mean, this morning, this was the discussion we had just before we're looking at some of the interviews that we done with Saada. And this was kind of thing we talked about accountability. Some of the stories we have in our own case, someone who said they keep coming. We do even as big organizations like USAID, the World Bank, and such big organization. Yeah, neither here nor there. It's all almost like a photo op, but it's also too short term. You know, the short termism, and in most cases, it doesn't go beyond the analysis and understanding of the issue and nothing. You know, in the case of the holding that the farmers we interviewed, I mean, they've not had any feedback. You know, I was just talking about that whole accountability issue we were discussing with Saada today around institutional intervention. I think this is a big issue. We need to start thinking of how we address it, to be honest. I don't know if Saada will want to add anything, but it's a big issue for us.
Yeah. Before, if anyone has a response, you're welcome to address that. But I also want to raise that there's one question in the chat from Arnab. So he says, thank you for all your presentation, especially for pointing out opportunities provided by collective enterprises. I was wondering if you could reflect on the inclusivity of these organizations and their ability to engage with issues of sustainability, like climate change adaptation, etc. Arnab, do you want to expand more on that questions in terms of which organizations and what kind of inclusivity you want us to reflect on? Or unless others have an answer now?
I mean, I was essentially talking about the kind of farmer enterprises that many of the panelists were talking about. So as part of the project that I'm working on, we also look at farmer producer organizations in India. And one of the issues that keep coming up is that they are only able to address very specific geographies or specific locations, often associated with a particular group. So if they can expand beyond a specific communal group or specific region. And also another issue that often comes up is that of addressing environmentally sustainable agricultural practices, because often these organizations engage in sales of chemical inputs, pesticides and fertilizers in these regions. So how can they address these along the way?
I can quickly respond to the inclusivity part. So cooperatives, let's take cooperatives for example. Cooperatives by definition are supposed to be open membership and voluntary membership, which means all inclusive. But most of the studies suggest that the successful cooperatives actually tweak that principle, so that it's not really open membership. It's actually they all the successful cooperatives put some condition on the membership, and that is essentially needed for their success also. That is an essential factor for their success. For example, in the case that I studied, though by definition cooperative has open membership, in the case that I studied, they had a condition that only those who own land and cultivate arecanut could be members of the cooperative. Others cannot be members of the cooperative. So that is not really open membership. So if we are looking at, so it also depends on how do we define inclusiveness. If we define inclusiveness as a more limited definition that the extent of land holding is not a constraint, then it is inclusive. But if we define inclusiveness in terms of non land owning farmers also, or non land owning people also should be included, then it is non-inclusive. So inclusiveness is actually a tricky thing. Your community part, the question on the community part, so the works by Baviskar, Attenwood, etc., they suggest that community is actually a major binding factor, especially the sugar cooperatives or the milk cooperatives in the western parts of India. Community is a binding factor. Community plays a role. Even in the case that I studied, there is a major particular community that is actually running the cooperative. So it is most of the members, almost 100% of the members are from that community. So community seems to play a role in the success of the collective enterprises. So there are limitations to this model also. That's what I would infer.
Thank you, Gopi. And I think maybe to some extent that kind of like gives some answers to Wayu's point earlier about if you're a member of a cooperative, the farmer producer groups that they have in Myanmar, you would find some members who are not giving more than they take. And in terms of like having a criteria for joining cooperatives might solve that. But again, it isn't as inclusive as ideal, because you will have to have some form of asset to join and contribute. But yeah, that's really interesting. Does anyone have anything to add or final points to raise? And I really appreciate that you all stayed on beyond the time that you were allotted. We have permission to stay on, which is wonderful. And I feel like that's very helpful. That's a very helpful discussion that we've had. Any final points? Yeah.
Yes, I have just one quick question about your research, you and Wei Hu, because it was very interesting to me, because we're doing some work with some women who are engaged in agricultural processing of rice, because in Nigeria it's like it's kind of gender segregated. In rural Kaduna, people who men grow the rice, and then the milling and the drying and is by the women. So I was actually very interested in the rice husk business, energy husk to energy business model. Can you tell me just a little bit about it? Because one of the great main costs for the women who do the milling is actually energy, and there they use firewood.
Okay.
So they don't use the rice husk at all. So I found it very interesting, and I thought it would.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go on. You can finish your question.
You mentioned something about the husk to energy business model. So I just wanted to know what you meant by that.
Right. What I'm sorry, I can respond quickly unless why you want to add something now. Yeah. Right. I'll start. So I guess the area that we went to it's Labuta. We went to 2 communities. When I mentioned about rice husk to energy business models, there's 2 that we noted. One is community partnership in Bitut, one of the areas where they have a technology developer, a local community, and a government that provided support in developing that business model. The rice husk comes from millers in that area and neighboring villages. They have the technology, in terms of the technology, they have local technology developers who are, so it's not burning the rice husk, they process it by gasification, which is great from an environmental perspective in terms of pollution and emissions, but that's a local technology which they're using. The supply schedule is still not 24 hours. It's 6 a.m. to 12 noon, 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. And the payment system is in terms of reloadable prepaid electricity cards. And that's managed by a group that's in the community, led by the technology developers themselves. The other business model that we found that's existing in Myanmar, in Kambet, the other village, is you have a local miller who's partnering with a private business person. So it's a partnership with those who has the husk, which are the millers, and then a person who's doing the business side of it. One of the technologies still use combustion. They still burn using a boiler engine, the rice husk to produce. The other one is gasification. But yeah, so there are those that exist. In terms of the gender element in that, I don't know if I've explored it enough, or we've explored it enough in our research. Maybe why I can tell more about the gender element in that. But the businesses that we've seen are ran in the milling side. They're ran by male. They would also own those milling businesses. They would definitely have more power because they have more money. Which I guess makes some difference, and maybe this is something that's in the culture, in the way that things are in terms of division of labor in households and agriculture that needed to be unpacked there. But yeah, there are business models that exist. The community partnership, please correct me if I'm wrong, Wayu, the community partnership should be open to anyone in the community, because it's one village benefiting from that energy, and they are also facilitated by the farmer FPE groups that are there. And if I'm not mistaken, FPE groups welcome both men and women. It's just those that are owning the milling facilities and the technologies for bioenergy generation. They tend to be men who have power because they have more money, and among other things. Yeah, something to be discussed, a bigger discussion on the gender element on things like this. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I can send a link to the report that we did. Oh, sorry, on the chat, if that's helpful. This would have more details on the project and the business models.
Thank you.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Right, I think we did an hour. That's wonderful. If anyone else has anything final to add, otherwise, it is thank you for me. This has been good, and I think maybe we can get in touch online through emails if you want to connect to each other in terms of research, because I feel like there is potential to learn from each, definitely to learn from each other's work. And
Yeah.
I don't know if there are potential for collaboration in the future. We've established a good network, I think, here in terms of our interest in agriculture and livelihoods. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the speakers, and thank you for all the good questions and the discussions.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye, everyone.
I'll be reaching out
Bye.
to you soon. So
Yeah,
on collaboration. Yeah. Bye.
no problem. Thank you. Bye.